there's a lot more to our rivers than the Trenton Channel. You've got from...
Turn off the lights a little so we can see that.
You can hear it. You got all the way from Lake Huron, the entire length of St. Clair River, all the delta system of the St. Clair River, even the shipping channel of Lake St. Clair, the Sturgeon Hole, which is Lake St. Clair, and all of the Detroit River is jigging. And even out in Lake Erie, the reefs. This is all jigging water, guys. We are in probably one of the best places for jigging in the entire country. And this is what you can expect to find in our waters. This is what Don caught on my boat last year. It was just over 10 pounds. He caught and released this female that was full of eggs last year on my boat. This was a 10-pound, almost 30-inch fish.
It wasn't a Derby weekend.
It was yeah. All the big fish Don caught last year was in between our derbies and before all the tournaments last year. Hard luck, Don. Okay, the first thing you're going to want to do is get a decent jigging rod. Your jigging rod should be the one rod you're going to spend the most money on. If you're going to spend more money on a jigging rod than you're going to spend on all your trolling rods put together. Okay? Should be about 6 feet. If you're over 6 feet, you can be a little bit bigger. If you're under 6 foot, you can be a little bit under. This happens to be a 6'3" rod. It has to be medium action. It's got to have a real extra fast tip. And by extra fast tip, I mean this. Only the tip moves. See that? That's all you want it to move on the tip. You don't want a big bow. You don't want a lot of action in your rod. You don't want a lot of action. You don't want a casting rod. The reason is, when you're in 30, 40 feet of water, and you've got a 3/4 ounce, even an ounce jig, this is a 5/8 ounce jig, but you got to be able to pick up that jig and not have that rod move. You want to instantly pick up that jig off the bottom of the river. If you're moving that hand and that rod's got a bow in it, that means that jig is still sitting on the bottom and you're snagged. You got to have a stiff rod, an extra fast tip, so that jig is being instantly moved off the bottom.
Do they sell them like that?
Yep.
Labeled like that?
Yes, they are. Now, stiff rod is going to be a sensitive rod. A good rod, you should be able to tell with practice the difference between mud and sand, sand and gravel, gravel and mall and rocks. You should be able to tell that difference down there with a good rod and a rod setup. You got to have high graphite content, IM8 or better. Now I'm going to show you a couple of different rods. This is the low end of a rod that you should look at. This is the starter rod. This is the absolutely minimum that I would tell you to go buy. This is a Bass Pro Shop walleye angler rod. And don't worry about spending money, man, on a rod. The reason is you're going to have a good rod for a long time. And I'll tell you how long I've had that rod that I had in my hand. I've had it more than 15 years. When you amateurize how long you've had a good rod, because a cheap rod busts on you and you're constantly buying it. Now this rod's about a $75 rod. I think they're a little bit more now, but they're not that much. Again, look at that, real fast tip. Not a lot of tip action. This is a little bit shorter rod, it's about 5'9". This is a Bass Pro Shop rod. Not near as sensitive as that rod is, but for the money, it's a very good rod. You also want to have a balanced rod. When you got the right reel, the right rod and everything, it should balance right before the reel. We'll talk about the reels next, but it should be nice and lightly balanced because your hand's right here. You want it to be light as a feather in your hand. But this is a starter rod, I would say the bare minimum. IM8 rod. You can get them on sale like right now when Bass Pro Shop has their annual sale on. And this is, like I said, when they're on sale, they're about 80 bucks. And this is an absolute minimum rod I would recommend. Next step up, and a lot of guys have been talking about this rod. It's a St. Croix Icon rod. I can't badmouth this rod too much, although it's a little whippy, a little tippy for me. It's got a little too much tip action. If I can get the... This rod right here with 8-pound test landed a 42-pound muskie during the trade trip last year. This very rod. Now this rod has a little bit more tip action to it. Can you see how much bends just a little bit more compared to the other rod? Again, real lightweight, balances really perfectly with a small reel. This is about $110 rod when they're on sale at Bass Pro Shop, again, right now. You can get them at Lakeside too, I think. This is a St. Croix Icon Walleye Series, medium action, 6'3" rod, real light. I don't care about this end of the rod, it's this end of the rod. It's got plenty of backbone in it. Lands good walleyes. Like I said, 42-pound muskie on this rod last year. Don saw it from his boat during the trade trip. Go back to this rod. This is my favorite rod. G. Loomis Walleye Series. Had this rod for more than 15 years. Cost $225 15 years ago. Now it costs $245. It's a bargain compared to that now. 15 years ago, gas was less than $2 a gallon. Now it's almost $4. So this is a bargain compared to what it was back then. This rod will last you a lifetime. And I've got 3 of them. This is worth every penny. You can feel the difference between sand and mud. You can tell when your wind-out worm or anything is folded over and pinched over. You can tell the difference when you're jigging, when it's foul hooked on something. You can tell when you've got a leaf or a very thin piece of grass on your hook. The reason why that's important is the longer you have junk on your line, the longer you'll be ineffective jigging. As soon as I feel something wrong when I'm jigging, I pull it right up, clear my line, right back down, bang, I'm effective again. That's why a sensitive rod is very effective, because you can tell when you're not working properly. This rod has caught many a fish. My personal best fish on the Detroit River was almost 12 pounds with this rod. It lands big fish, small fish. It doesn't matter, but it's perfectly balanced with this reel. It's super lightweight. I can jig all day long with this thing. They are fantastic rods. I love them. But anything with St. Croix, Fenwick, G. Loomis, they all work great. I like spinning rods because the spinning reel's underneath. They balance nice. You can work them all day long. A lot of guys have gone to bait casters. There's nothing wrong with a bait caster, except one thing. I can't find a decent rod. Bait casting rods are made for 2 things: casting, and if it's a casting rod, it's absolutely no good. They're too whippy. They're made to throw spinner baits. They're made to throw lightweight bass rods. The other rod, which this is a flipping rod. This is a pool cue. This is the flipping rod. I don't know if you can tell that action. That has almost no action to it. I use this for heavy baits and specifically for deep water. This is a 3/4 ounce jig, 1 ounce jigs, and more specifically, I like it for spoon fishing. Heavy spoons. This is good for spoon fishing. It's a 6 rod, but it's because it's got a long handle, and I can put that long handle next to my arm and snap jig those heavy spoons. And that's what this rod is really good for. But I have not found a really good bait casting rod. That's why I don't use bait casting rods all the time, because I just haven't found a good one. But a lot of guys like bait casting reels. There's nothing wrong with bait casting reels, and we'll get into those. We'll get into the reels next. But there's really good spinning rods out there, and spinning rods are really nice to handle. That's an 8.5 pound fish again during our. That was during the trader trip. Again, that's early May. Spawned out female. The reels. Front drag or rear drag spinning reels. Doesn't matter anymore, guys. Rear drags reels are just as good as front drags anymore. Got me on them for a while using rear drag reels. They're really good. They're easy to adjust. They're easier to adjust. They're fine. Front drags are easier to find though. But they got to be small. When you're jig fishing, you want a small reel. Think of jig fishing as a surgical tool, or if you're a golfer, as your putter. It's a very specific tool. You're not going to be using this rod for casting out in St. Clair for smallmouth or God forbid. But anyway, you're not going to be. This is not a casting rod. This is not a rod you're going to be using for anything else but for jigging. So all you need is 30. You're going to be fishing in 30 to 40 feet of water. That's all the line you're going to be using. So use this real small reel. The reason is because you got a big reel on here. That's a lot of weight, and it's going to throw off the balance of the rod. It's going to throw off the balance that you're going to have in your hand. You want something that balances that rod and reel combination perfectly. You don't want a heavy reel. You don't want a big reel. All you want is 110, 120 yards of line. So that's about 1,000 series. But it's got to be smooth and balanced. Don't get a real cheap reel, but you can save some money on it. Get a mid-priced reel. It has to have, I don't care if it's a bait caster or a spinning reel, it has to have instant and a reverse. Now what I mean by that, when you take your hand off the handle, or when you stop the handle, it doesn't move when the drag is on. When the drag is engaged, the instant and reverse is on. The handle doesn't move. Some reels, the handle moves. Up to a 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch either way. When you're jigging and that handle's moving, all you feel is the handle going thump, 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 thump. You don't feel a fish hit it. You got to have instant and reverse. Bait casters have to have a flipping switch. And those are getting harder and harder to find, let me tell you. This is a flipping switch right here. Flipping switch lets you do this. Hit the button, and the jig falls. As long as your hand's on it, as soon as your thumb comes off the button, it stops. Lets you adjust. That's why a lot of guys like bait casters. They can adjust it real easy. But like I said, finding a decent rod is hard. There's not that many good rods out there. A lot easier to find a real good spinning rod. Now you can get in and spend a lot of money on a good spinning rod or a good bait caster rod. Like I said, you don't. You can save a little money or save quite a bit of money. You don't need a lot of ball bearings for this. You can get by with a mid-price reel. I like Shimano Symmetries. I've got a bunch of them. That's what are on my spinning rods. They're about a $90 reel. They last a long time. I've had some of them for 10 years. They last a long time. It's $9 a year if you want to amateurize it. The line you want to use. Get one of the super lines. Our Pro Flame Green, Fireline Flame Green. You want something that you can see. Flame green, don't get the dark green or black. The reason is, the thinner diameters of these, the better. If you're jigging with mono, you get a big bow. The water pressure of the river will put a bow in that mono line, and you lose feel contact with your jig. It's also no stretch. You're going to get a good, solid hook set with that jig into that fish. You'll put that jig right into its jaw. You get a real good jig set. Also, use fluorocarbon leader. I used to tie directly on when I first started jigging. When I started tournament jigging, I listed Parsons and Cabayas. They tie right on. Catch a lot more fish using fluorocarbon leaders on our rivers. Jordan River will get crystal clear. St. Clair River is almost always crystal clear. Use a fluorocarbon leader. And I use this to tie it on with. This is a Spro number 8, size 8 swivel. This is a real tiny swivel, 75-pound test. 42-pound muskie last year didn't destroy this swivel, let me tell you. And I've caught sturgeon with this. But 8-pound test, fluorocarbon leader, and the reason is, fluorocarbon has great abrasion resistance, much better than monofilament. This will go through the rocks better, it won't cut off on the rocks and all the junk down there in the Detroit River. Also has great knot strength as long as you wet it. You have to wet it. Right before you pull it down tight, run it through your mouth, get it nice and tight. When you do that, wet it down, it has a better knot strength. And use a polymer knot to tie your jigs on. Use a polymer knot. Don't use your old trilene knots or your double trilene knot or whatever you want to use, fisherman's knot. Use a polymer knot, 100% knot, much better knot. That's that 42-pound muskie last year, caught and released during the trade trip. Guys had a ball catching that fish. Okay, the jigs you want to use. First of all, you don't see any round head jigs up there. If anybody wants any round head jigs, I'll sell you all the ones I got because I don't have that many anymore. All the jigs should have long shanks on it. That's a long shank. That's got a long shank on it. Those have long shanks on it. You want a long shank on all your hooks. It's got to have a large gap on it too. The gap is this part between here and there. The reason is when you thread your plastics on there, that bulks up there, you got to have a good sized gap between there so when your plastics are on there, so there's something, a good sized gap so the walleye has something to get in their mouth. I like multicolored jigs. The jig is the last thing that the walleye sees. The first thing that comes down at him is the bait, whether it's a minnow or a wind-out worm or finesse or whatever you got coming at him. I don't know if you know that, because it's kind of like a weather vane. The jig coming down is a weather vane. The tail is the light end first. The jig is the heavy end. With the current, the heavy end is pointing up current. The light end is going down current. So the jig is the last thing they see. But sometimes it comes by them on a side angle. It's coming at a side angle, not right at their nose. So color does make a difference sometimes, but it's the last thing that I worry about. but I use multicolored jigs. So if they are keying on one color, I've got 3 colors on my jig, so play it safe. Also, increase your weight jig as the depth, wind, or current dictates. If it's blowing 20 miles an hour, you better have 1 ounce jigs on there, or even better. Myself, if I'm in my boat by myself, I can fish a 3/8 ounce jig, no problem. Almost anywhere in the Detroit River. 1/2 ounce jig, no problem. I got people in my boat that are not as good jig fishermen. I'm fishing 5/8 ounce or better because they can't feel the bottom, or they can't. They're not as skilled fishermen as me. They don't have as good a rod as I do. I'm going to have a heavier jig. It's blowing 10 miles an hour. I'm going to have a heavier jig. It's blowing 20 miles an hour. I'm going to have my bow mount on high. I'm going to be having a heavier jig, making sure everybody else has a heavier jig. The other thing is, everybody in the boat should have the same weight jig. Everybody should have the same weight jig. If I've got one weight jig, and the guy in the back of the boat has another weight jig, and we're going down river, our lines are going to be crossing, going different directions. He's not going to feel the river bottom the way I am, because I'm in front of the boat. I'm vertical. He's going to be scooting in front of me or behind me. Everybody has to have the same weight jig all the time. My favorite jig style, the ultra minnows. Here's one right here. They got a minnow-shaped head. They're very hydrodynamic. They got a pointed end, they got a narrow top, and a keel bottom. So they're weighted more on the bottom than the top. The reason why I like these, they don't spin. Round head jigs, all head jigs spin. They do the dance down there. That's why guys have to have barrel swivels. Round head jigs, you jig them up, they come up, they spin, they go down, they spin. These are like keel weights. You jig them up, they stay steady, they go down. Come up, go down. Come up, go down. They're ultra minnows. Problem is, you'll never see them in a bait shop. You know where I get them? That guy right there. I buy all my jigs now from him. 5/8, 3/4, 1 ounce, I can get them all from him. These ultra minnows, and he puts a great finish on them, and that's where I buy them from. Richard Benson, our vice president, and he'll have a ton of them next month because I already talked to him. I said, I'm going to be promoting your jigs.
Warned me, not talk to me, warned me.
I warned him. That color right there, that pink with a purple top, hot last year, the last 2 years. Let me tell you, that combined with a finesse fish was really hot. Huge on the Detroit River and St. Clair River. That color combination was on fire last year.
What color is the finesse fish?
It didn't matter, but brown trout, anything natural color was huge on that. The one above that, kind of like a perch pattern, with that, mated that with a perch finesse. That was another real hot pattern. But those are my favorite jigs. They don't spin. He puts a great coating on them. They don't chip. He uses great hooks. He uses those sickle hooks that are so sharp that if you get near them, they're going to hook you.
32 of them learned when they go back forward.
They are so good. They're the best. That's 11.5 pounder out of Detroit River. Other style jigs that work. Bucktails. Bucktails still work. Fish haven't seen them in so many years that they're new to the fish. They work real good. That's a stand-up jig with a spinner on the back of it. It's got a ball bearing swivel there. Those things, a few years ago, 2 tournaments were won the same year on the Detroit River with that jig. Those are really good. I got some here tonight. Cabela's was selling them. You can get them online. That's another one that was really good last year. That's a mimic minnow. You can buy those, that's commercially, that comes as a package like that. It's a mimic minnow. You can get them up to 3/4 ounce. This Whistler jig in chrome and gold on the St. Clair River is killer with a finesse fish. That is a great combination, that Whistler jig. And right there, that is not just, that Rapala, jig and Rapala, is not just a wintertime bait. Number 9 Rapala, jig and Rapala. Big Chief Papanaw, several years ago, took second place on the Detroit River PWT, and he took almost won the FLW the next year on the Detroit River. Number 9s, these are 3/4 ounce, vertical jigging these things on the Detroit River. Killer. These things work really good. One of my secret baits when I was tournament fishing. I don't like to lose these things, but these were on sale from Cabela's this winter, so I bought a ton of them. They were only a couple bucks. I don't know why they were clearing out these number 9s, but they were. These things were killer. These things are killer. What you do is fish these on the Detroit River. See that treble? You take it off. You take that bottom treble off. Then you bend out these 2 hooks slightly, and you twist them up so they're out a little bit. Come up here, you can tip. This hook's twisted a little bit, so is this twisted, and it's twisted up a little bit. Killer bait on a Detroit River. You vertical jig it. You kind of snap it up, and you hold it, and it does its little dance, settles down, and you let it go down a little bit, and snap it up a little bit again. Killer bait. But most guys are afraid to use it because they don't want to lose it. But all those jigs are more effective too. Use a stinger hook. Most of these guys, most of the time, because you're using a heavier jig on the Detroit, especially the St. Clair River, the advantage of using a real light jig, if you've got the talent to do it, if you've got the boat control, a walleye feeds by opening its gills and mouth and creating a vacuum and sucking its bait in. And most minnows are buoyant, so they don't weigh hardly anything underwater. So when they create that vacuum, that bait goes right in its mouth. And when you got a light jig, it goes and it goes in its mouth. When you got a heavier jig, it goes and it stops short of its mouth. That's why you use a stinger hook, because you're jigging, you go, oh, I missed it. You're short hitting. Well, they're not short hitting, they're sucking it in, but you're using such a heavy jig that it's not going all the way in its mouth when it's sucking it. When it's feeding, it's flaring its gills and sucking it in to feed. Your jig is so heavy, it's not making it all the way into its mouth. The ones they make in the bait shops, they make them for these, they make them in Wisconsin, Minnesota. They use number 12 hooks, number 12 hooks, number 10 hooks. Very rarely you can find number 8 hooks. I use number 6. A number 6 bleeding bait red Daiichi red treble hooks. Real high-end treble hooks. I also use 12-pound Mason. Here, I'll show you why. I'll show you during a break. You guys can come up here. I don't know if you can see this. See how that stands straight back from the hook. That Mason line is so stiff when you put this. Now this slips on. Don't do this on the boat. Don't try and use a. In fact, I've got it over here. I don't want to impale my fingers. Let's take this off. Take your needle nose pliers, grab a hold of the collar, and this slips right off because it's got a slip knot on it. I wrote an article on our newsletter just this month how to tie these, and I'll show. I got a demonstration, but it looks real short. But when you put this on your hook, If I can see the hook, and pull it real tight, it stands straight off the hook. When you're jigging like that, stand straight out, and you don't, and it doesn't wrap underneath the, doesn't go underneath the line. The other advantages of those ones that are dipped in plastic, they wear out, they flop underneath, you're snagged on the bottom of the river with a treble hook. Also, the ones that are dipped in plastic, they're hard to get on, they're hard to get off. And eventually you wear that hole out, you're no good anymore. These slip on, slip off. I'm going to demonstrate how to tie them. You don't want to tie them? Fine, I got them for sale here. They're a lot better than you can buy at any bait shop. But that's why I use the Mason hard-type mono. That's our president last year with a pre-tournament fish, 11-pounder, caught on my boat last year. Live bait, let's talk about that for a minute. I don't use live bait anymore, but when you do, you use minnow in cold water, usually below 42 degrees. Why 42? Because at 42 they start getting real active and you don't need minnows anymore. Emerald shiners are like candy to walleye. If your bait shop doesn't have emerald shiners and you go in there, walk out. Spot tails are a distant second. If all they got are spot tails, or worse, you walk in and they got mud minnows, flatheads, just walk out. Don't even go back there. Here's a tip that I learned from the guys from Wisconsin and Minnesota. In their boats, they order their live wells with green interiors, with fiberglass boats. You don't have to do that. Get yourself a green minnow bucket. Emerald shiners are called emerald for a reason. They have a green back to them when they're real green. When they're fresh out of the water. This is a weight bucket. Look at those emerald shiners. Do they look green to you? They're all washed out. There's no color to those emerald shiners. They might as well be dead. Look at the color. There is no color to those shiners at all. They're in a white bucket. Shiners, all fish, are chameleons. They will take on whatever surrounding color they are in. If you got a white minnow bucket, they are going to wash out. They will try and match their color to whatever their surrounding is. I learned this on the tournament trail, guys. Get a green minnow bucket. If you don't have a green minnow bucket, paint it green. And then wash it real good so the green doesn't kill the fish. Get some kind of environmentally good green paint. But try and find a green plastic bucket and keep your minnows in it. They will pop green. Those emerald shiners will come out looking like their name, emerald. They will have a really nice color to them. And the fish will go, I want you. I will eat you. I learned this from the guys that kicked my ass on the tournament trail, so believe me, it works.
You took my green minnow bucket.
Let's talk about plastics. I use plastics alone when the water's above 45. Specifically, there's right there, that's the Wyandotte worm. Probably the most used thing on the Detroit River nowadays. That's a finesse fish. Use that a little bit right after the Wyandotte worm. That's a great bait. My tip is I cut off the finesse fish is a smallmouth bass bait to be used on drop shots. Okay? That's what it was designed for. I bite off or snip off the head of the bait. Okay? I just cut off that little tip and I thread it onto my jig. It holds on the jig better. Rides on the jig better. It jigs better. Oops. Let's go back. This is the tomato worm. I don't know if you guys heard about the tomato worm. It's got a red core with a chartreuse over it. It's made by Lumber City. Bass Pro Shop also has it. If you want the 4-inch variety, Bass Pro Shop has it. Real good as the water warms up a little bit. Real hot bait on the St. Clair River, Detroit River. Real good bait. This is a Bass Assassin. My personal best walleye on the Detroit River came on that bait, 11.5 pounds. Bass Assassin, big Bass Assassin. That's a sassy shad. That's another one that is really, really hot. To fish this though, you cut a little V-notch right there before the real thin part of the tail, right there. Gives the tail a lot more action. All these right here, all these 4 colors are really good. Those are all gulp. That's all gulp bait colors. And then over here, all these plastics, these are like power bait plastics. Those are all good baits. Why are we going backwards? There we go. All right, add scent to your plastics, guys. Another tournament trick. Wyandotte worms aren't scented. Put all your Wyandotte worms, no matter what color, put all the same color ones in a plastic bag. Resealable plastic bag. Squirt scent on them. Tournament, this Dr. Juice tournament trail walleye scent, you can get it Lakeside, you can get it almost anywhere. Works pretty good. Yeah, you can. Lakeside has it. They've had it. You can get it at Bass Pro Shop, you can get it at Cabela's. This stuff is killer. Kicking walleye. Bass Pro Shop, Cabela's has it online. You won't find it in your store because every walleye fisherman buys it as soon as it hits a shelf. But you can buy it online. Kicking walleye. This stuff is killer. This little bottle costs as much as this big bottle. But this stuff is killer. But you got to put it in the baggies and squirt it on and let it marinate. He's been marinating since, I don't know, 2 years ago, I think. Put it in there, let it marinate. It does several things, like I wrote in the article this last month. First of all, you put it on there and it permeates your baits and it gives a really good scent. Second of all, it hides your scent. If you've been eating a salami sandwich, you've gassed up your boat, whatever, petting your dog, it hides that, any scent that's on your hand. Third thing it does, it makes your baits a lot more limber. These things coming out, they got kinks in them, they get it in a bag. This thing makes them more limber, gives more action to the bait, just makes them better. The scent also, you're going to catch more fish, flat out, period. Guys come on my boat and say, how are you catching more fish? We're using the same bait. Yeah, but you're not, your baits aren't marinated in this stuff. Kicking walleye. Go online, buy it. Stuff's great. It really works. All my unscented baits, like the finesse fish, anything that is not scented, I put in bags and I marinate it in that stuff. Works really, really good.
How much is that? Kicking walleye?
About $7 for a little bottle like that. But you know what? It's worth it. You just put several drops, make sure there's enough to coat all your stuff in, zip it up, and then put those in. Put all your worms in one plastic bag, a gallon plastic bag. Put all your finesse fish in another plastic bag. Put all your similar baits in a big plastic, gallon bag. Put all those together in a bigger plastic bag. And then keep those in your boat. You don't have to buy a bag like that. Yeah, you can use a hard container if you want to. I just like the plastic bags because you can see through them. You can see all your baits right away.
Have you used that stuff there? The gulp?
Yeah, and the gulp in the bags work. That stuff is super expensive. The unscented bags with that in it works just as good, if not better. That stuff is very, very soft, but it's not real limber. Where a wind-out worm or the finesse fish, marinated in that stuff, I think is even better. That stuff is highly, highly marketed, and a lot of the price is that marketing. Rigging your plastics. Here's another thing. I'll probably get hell over this. Okay, here's the famous hot wired rig. You got a jig head, you got your plastic threaded on there, and if you want to know how hot wire rig, it's on our website. It's also on Michigan Sportsman's website. This is tied onto this little jig, this little hook here is actually threaded in here and tied onto the jig. So this jig and this bait is married to this jig all the time, and you got a little hook on the end. So don't get me wrong, it's going to catch fish. You're going to catch fish with it, but it's married to that jig. You can't change it, except by changing the whole thing. The way I rig mine, I have a jig, I have that removable, and I have that removable. So I can change that. So without changing the jig head, I can change the bait to a wind-out worm, or I can change a finesse, or whatever. And I can change that, stinger hook, which has a much bigger stinger hook on it, on and off very quickly. And again, that's tournament fishing. I want to do stuff fast, get it off, on, efficient, and in the water. As fast as possible and as efficiently as possible. And a bigger treble hook, I think, loses less fish. And also, when you got it hot wired, it takes action away from the bait. That worm doesn't have as much action because you've got the hook at the end, which has the most action. You got a hook in it, and you've got a piece of string monofilament tying it together, which takes away some of the action. There's nothing to take away the action here because this is standing straight back. That stiff mono is standing straight back. There's nothing to inhibit the action. Also, double tailing, where you got one tail, then you take a partial tail on the next one. That's how I caught my biggest fish on the Detroit River, with that big bass assassin and another piece of plastic on top of it, double tailing. You catch it. That's a big fish secret, guys. Double tailing like that. It imitates two minnows swimming together, two injured minnows. Also, triple threats like a Dubuque rig, where you got a jig, a minnow, or any kind of minnow imitating, or any kind of plastic bait with a three-way swivel up there, and a floating rig with a minnow or a Rapala above it. That's a really good rig on the Detroit River or St. Clair River. Jigging with that. That's an old captain's secret on the Detroit River. That's a really good way to fish. That's a 3-man limit on Detroit River last year with Don and Al from my boat. Now we get to the three most important things of vertical jigging. Doesn't matter what rod you got, what reel you got, what line you got, what jigs you got. If you're not doing these three things, you're not going to catch a lot of fish. First is boat control. Second is boat control. And the third is boat control. If you're not vertical, you're not catching fish, guys. Try to keep your lines as vertical as possible. If you're at a 45-degree line one way or behind the boat or side of the boat or whatever, you're going to be snagging and you're not going to be catching fish. You're not going to feel bottom. You've got to keep it vertical. The guy in front of the boat or the back of the boat, if you're in the back of the boat, has to keep it vertical. And this is not an exaggeration. That's about what the Trenton Channel looks like. Relative to my size boat, those are what those stupid boulders look like down there. You got to keep that line vertical. That's good. Keep that jig in the walleye is going to hit it. If it's at an angle like that, where your jig, you're going to be snagging on those rocks. or on that angle, you're going to be snagging on the rocks. You got to keep your bow into the wind, and that means the current's coming this way. You got to compensate for the wind. Keep the bow into the wind. The current's going to let the boat go down this way, and you just compensate for the wind. But you got to keep it keep it vertical. A lot of times you call it chasing the line, wherever the line is going. Your goal is to keep the boat, the line, the jig, all moving downriver at the same speed. The way to do this is to pulse the motor. I fish out of the bow of the boat with an electric motor, and I pulse the boat. I put it on about 3/4 or 80%, somewhere around there. Full speed. I got a 24-volt system. It's about 80-pound thrust. I hit at 80%, and I pulse it. I go, okay, I'm vertical. The wind pushes me off the boat. Wind pushes me off. I'm up. I'm constantly doing it, just compensating for the wind all the time. I don't worry about the current. The current's going to be pushing me down at 4 or 5 miles an hour, 7 miles an hour on the St. Clair River. It doesn't matter. But I'm always compensating for the wind. All I'm doing is just going back up vertical. If you're constantly looking at your line, I'm also looking at my console, my bow mount electronics, and I'm actually seeing my jig going up and down all the time. And I can see fish on me going in my screen, my circle of my transducer down there. So you want to pulse your motor. You want to try to keep the line in a 6-inch circle. Imagine a coffee can, 6 or 8 inches, and you just want to keep that line in that 6 or 8 inch circle all the time. You just want to pulse it. So pulse that motor so it's always going up and down. Depends on the wind. Sometimes you're going to be standing on that thing all the time, sometimes not. To jig the jig, jigging, I don't know why they call it jigging, but you want to keep it near the bottom. Especially in a cold, early in the season. A lot of times I just tap bottom and just hold it off the bottom. Most of the time, early in the season, until the water's above 50, those fish are real lethargic. They just want to see that thing floating down the river, and then they'll hit it. They have a small reaction zone. Jig more aggressively in warm water. Do whatever it takes. Don't get in the habit of just doing the same thing. Lift it and drop it, suspend it, twitch it, hold it off the bottom and just vibrate your hand, twitch it, snap jig it when it's a little bit, but you don't want to do this. I see guys in Detroit who are doing this all the time. They're not jigging, they're just trying to snag fish. I'm not kidding, they're just trying to snag fish. They're going down and hoping there's something near them and hoping they're snagging. You want to stay within 2 feet of the bottom almost all the time. When I'm saying snap jigging, I mean lifting it up like that, snapping your wrist a little bit. Snapping it up. Sometimes you want to lift it up, drop it real slow. Sometimes you'll want it on a fast drop. But all you want to do is tap bottom and immediately lift it. If you tap bottom and drag it down there, I'm going to guarantee you you're going to be snagging the bottom. Also, let's talk about heavy metal. Very effective jigging method in the fall. In the fall, they love metal. Also in Erie, early in the spring, they love these things right here. Cicadas in this style jigging spoon or jigging metal jigs. They love those things out in Erie. But all these things right here, Hopkins spoons, this is a rattlesnake. This is probably the most effective thing I've ever found. It's got a rattle inside, it's hollow, metal spoon, it's got tape on it. That thing works really good. And you want to snap it up like that and let it go down, and just jig it up and down. Those things are really effective. And those are some of the results. Some of the big fish. And there's Bob Barnes. Those are a couple of big fish that he got on our boat last year. And I want to thank you. Any questions you guys want to hit me with, go right ahead.
fish the Troy River or the St. Clair River, do you ever get over to the North Channel by Decker's area and fish the same way? Or is there a different way? Because we do have deep water there.
Yeah,
70 foot or what have you, in a couple spots.
Yeah, I fish that area. I tend to fish it in the fall when the boaters get out of there because of wakes and no wake areas and all that. I've fished that area and I've done really well in there at times. But the congestion and the idiots in that area tend to have me get out of there.
You do live with that problem.
Yeah.
The other thing is, we get a north wind or a northwest wind there, then we'll get rollers because it's going against the current. And that is difficult, like you say, to keep it vertical. That's almost impossible.
Well, the nice thing about our area, especially that you got a whole delta system to fish, you can always get out of the wind somewhere in that area. You got to burn a little gas to get out of the wind, going up the Snai or going up over to the middle channel, but there's always somewhere to get out of the wind.
Yeah, well, generally, they are right from Deckers to the open.
I'll tell you, down by the yacht club off the middle channel by the out by the lake, that's another really good spot. But there's so many good spots jigging, it's unbelievable. We have such good jigging water here, and the handliners too. And that's another thing. Let me tell you, let me back up. Here's a secret, guys, between handlining and jigging. When I started tournament fishing, I thought I was going to kill and make a ton of money because I know how to handline. Let me tell you a secret. There is a time to jig and there is a time to handline, especially tournaments. When the water is going from clear to dirty, handline, because those fish will turn off the jig bite. But when it's dirty and starting to clear up, even though it looks dirty enough to handline, those fish turn on to the jig bite like you won't believe. Because a lot of times that water on the top is dirty, that is dirtier than the water on the bottom. I don't know why it's acting up all of a sudden, but anyway. Those fish, when it's going from dirty to clear, will turn on the jig bite very, very quickly. So, it's timing. Like I said, dirty to clear, go to jigging. When it's clear to jig, when it's clear to going dirty, that's when you handline. And I learned that. I always have my handline reels and always have my jigging stuff in the boat because I don't know what the Troy River is going to do. And I might want to go on to the Canadian side or the American side. See what side the bite's better. Depends on who's calling me up. Hey Keith, get over here. The jigging bite's great. Or hey Keith, the handline bite's great. I keep both equipment in my boat at all times.
You ever hook the back of the minnow onto the stinger hook?
Yeah, but I almost exclusively use plastics nowadays. I hardly ever use minnows unless one of the guys in my boat wants to use
I mean the plastic. The end of the plastic on the stinger hook?
No, my stinger hook is free and clear, sticking straight back. I do not put anything on my hook. I don't put the stinger in the hook because stinger into the plastic because it inhibits the action of the plastic. That's why I use that real stiff mono, so it's staying straight back, so my action of my bait is uninhibited. Any other? Yeah, what? We can go on break. If you guys want to come up here and look at my stuff, my other jigs and stuff, my rods, you can take a look at it, and we'll put everything over, and then let me hook over the stuff for Don so he can have it.